Chapter 3, Part 3. Now, there's still 2 more actual PowerPoints I have to go through, so I'll try to speed this up a little bit. So, we talked about intaglio. So, where you scratched the metal, that's where the ink is, and then it gets pressed really hard, wiped off, and then pressed really hard into the paper, and that is the ink transfers from the deep areas onto the paper. This is how money is printed, by the way. Woodblock prints are kind of like a rubber stamp or your shoe when you step in something wet or greasy or whatever, and you have a good boot print, like a thick sole, and then you step on something and you leave the footprint. Okay? That's how woodblock, it's also lino cuts, linoleum, same stuff you put on your floor, only artists take it and they carve on it. But woodblock and carving into linoleum are the same thing, slightly different material, but they're both relief printing, okay? So it's the higher areas that are inked up, meaning the top surface. So dry point engraving, these are types of intaglio. We're skipping back here. So dry point is scratched on a metal plate with a burin, and then just think of like a sharp tool, and then ink is rubbed into the scratches, and then the plate is smushed on really hard, and the ink in those deep places shows up on the paper. Engraving, very similar. It's incised lines, and it's a polished metal plate. It's a little hard to explain here, but there are different. Etching is using chemicals after you scratch it. You scratch it up here, so there's a protective ground on there. There's protective stuff put onto the metal. Then you scratch it with your tool, and then you pop it into an acid bath. And it's very toxic, by the way. It's not a great way to work if you're worrying about your health. And you leave it in the bath. Now, if I wanted this line to be super dark, like over here, I would leave it in the acid longer to let it cut into the metal more. My lines, what I drew, I could draw them all very lightly, but if I left it in there for a while, I would get heavier, darker colors, and I would get more ink into those cracks. And that is still, those cracks are what is making the lines. Aquatint is a little different, still an intaglio process, and it's a metal plate covered with an acid-resistant powder resin. But certain areas are left open, and then you get these big areas where the acid cuts into it. So you get these big sort of soft areas of color. It's not as much drawing as it is sort of like, I don't know how you would say, like a big area of color, like a background. Okay, lithography. This particular piece, lithography is a third thing. It doesn't get included in intaglio. So you take a crayon, it's saying oily pencil, but let's just think of it because you don't know what an oily pencil is. Think of a crayon on limestone, these things are 200 pounds a pop. They're very heavy, but it's a thick 4-inch slab of limestone. It's usually like, well, this particular one is 68 by 56. That's huge. It's over 6 feet, and almost 6 feet. So that's massive. That's probably more like a 400 or 500 pound rock, basically, limestone. Very specific type of limestone, and I believe it's from Italy. So you write on it with a crayon, and then you ink it, and then you wipe it, and this all takes like hours and hours. I can't even explain how complicated this process is. But what happens is the oil-based ink adheres to the greasy marks. So everything you're seeing here is a drawing, an actual what is drawn. It's not cut, it's drawn. And then the ink, like the red ink is put over here and the brown ink is put there. And the drawing grabs it, if that makes sense. And then the greasy part grabs the ink, and then it's compressed into paper. Now, Lithography, this is traditional lithography. Commonplace current lithography, called four-color lithography, is how posters, packaging, your cereal box, your newspaper, everything is printed that way. And it's not with this big heavy limestone slab, it's done with metal. Totally different sort of way of working, but it's still lithography, if that makes sense. Serigraphy, also known as screen printing, you're already familiar with because many of your t-shirts or sports paraphernalia that you've bought over the years is done in just this way. It can be done on fabric. It is also done on paper, and we're looking at Andy Warhol's silk screens that were very famous, and these are done on paper. Now, part of his technique or part of his idea was to make it not perfect and to not register and line up. So when you do, this one in particular really shows it in this one, when you do a silk screen, you're lining up the shapes, you're lining up everything, because say the face is green and the hair is yellow and so on. So you have to do one pass of green for one screen, and then you have to line it up with the other screen, and then do a pass of yellow and build up all the colors. This is off registration intentionally. You can kind of see that, and you've probably seen this in a newspaper or magazine at some point in time. But that was his concept here, okay? But still what he's doing is he's pushing color through a screen, like a window screen, pushing the color through it. Where the color does not go is where it's blocked out. So for instance, the pink has been processed through here and around there, but it's been blocked out at the eyebrow, blocked out at the hair. So the ink will not pass through that. Ink passes through in the pink part. Monotype, a little confusing. Don't even know why monotype exists personally. Basically, you go to all the work of making a painting and then you smush it into paper once. The idea with screen printing, any kind of other printmaking, is multiples, that you can make 20 or you can make 10 or whatever. Or in the case of cereal boxes, you can make thousands or hundreds of thousands from the same matrix. Now, with monotype, you just draw usually on plexiglass, metal, or glass, real glass, and then you put the paper on that drawing. And a lot of people do even things like finger painting, smushing the paint around onto the glass, and then you put a piece of paper on it, and then you smush it on there, and you rub it, and you pull it off, and that's a monotype. Okay, next video.